My neighborhood in Ohio is a spectacular place, filled with kind and caring people who love to have fun. This is the water balloon fight that caps off our annual 4th of July celebrations. Our kids look good, right? Active, healthy. But like most neighborhoods in the U.S., especially those in the Midwest, obesity is a real problem for us grown-ups. First, the food is really good. Second, food is community. Are you really going to say no to a piece of Mrs. Mitchell's pound cake at the 4th of July picnic? I can tell you, you're not. For this next part of the story, we're going to use pet pictures instead of people pictures. Stick with me. A couple of Christmases ago, my neighbor Meredith got a new fitness tracker. Meredith was already a really active person and was constantly telling us how cool it was to track your activity. She ended up giving her old fitness tracker to our neighbor Russ. Russ thought he was pretty active too, but his weight had crept up over the years. His diabetes was getting more difficult to control. He decided to give it a try. After 6 months, Russ, who doesn't have a scale at home, too depressing, went to see his doctor. He had lost 20 pounds. His blood sugars were excellent. His doctors were amazed. Along the way, Annie joined the neighborhood fitness tracking trend. After her knee replacement, she had been slow to start moving again. Danielle wanted to get back to being active after the birth of her sons. Jeff was struggling with the loss of a family member to gun violence. They all lost weight. They all felt better. As a clinician, I can say this is magical, a contagion of fitness. Wearable technologies revolutionizing the ways in which people monitor their own health. They're empowered. This is so exciting. But what about the data? As a researcher, I say, please share this important health data with science. We want to cure diabetes. We want to stop cancer in its tracks. This data could really help us. So, how do people feel about sharing their health data? Well, when surveyed by the folks at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, more than 75% of people said that they would be willing to share their personal health data, like data from their fitness tracker, with researchers. This is fantastic news because the health problems that we're trying to treat and cure are really complex. And modern research needs oodles of data because our health has a lot of different dimensions. What's written in our DNA, what runs in our families, where we live and work, even what we do with our spare time. All of this together, all of these layers, this is the big data that we hear so much about. But there's a catch. Although more than 75% of people said they'd be willing to share their personal health data, more than 95% of people think that it's important that their health data remain anonymous. These findings certainly hold up in my neighborhood, which explains the pet pictures. My neighbors wanted to help me do my science thing, but not if I was going to be showing people pictures of them. People want to help scientists solve important health problems. They just want to be anonymous while doing it. Fair enough. How hard could that be? Friends, I have some bad news. It turns out it's nearly impossible to be anonymous these days. The data from fitness trackers and phones, and all of the other devices you come in contact with every day is tremendously identifiable. It's identifiable because the systems that are used to generate the data can be used to re-identify you. And it's identifiable because there's a lot of public information out there about you, which can be combined with your private data to re-identify you. For example, just 6 days of step count data plus public information about you is enough to uniquely identify you among 100 million people. This re-identifiability can be a problem for the groups you belong to as well. You may remember this from the very beginning of 2018. Strava, a fitness tracking company, released heat maps showing where in the world people were exercising. As part of their terms of service, Strava had asked for permission to do so. Unfortunately, the heat maps exposed the location of top secret U.S. military bases. Oops. The folks at the Pentagon were not amused. They contended that the service members whose data was shared couldn't possibly have known about this clause because if they did, they would have realized it violated the promises they made to keep their location secret. The truth is, nobody reads these agreements, and even if they try, nobody understands them. In one study, researchers added a clause to the terms and conditions for a fictitious social networking site. The clause said that you had to give up your firstborn child in order to use the social networking services. 98% of people agreed to these terms. How can we be so easily tricked? Well, there are two main ways. The first pathway is user interface, or UI. If you've ever tried to unsubscribe from anything, you've likely encountered deceptive UI. For example, how on earth are you supposed to unsubscribe here? Check the boxes, uncheck the boxes? Tellingly, after the Pentagon protested, Strava not only took down the offending data, they also very, very quickly updated their user interface to make it easier to find and use their privacy settings. Another way that we're tricked into giving out information that we would rather remain private is through obfuscation. In other words, using words to fool or confuse you. You've probably heard of Instagram. It's really popular. 3/4 of American teenagers are on Instagram. A group of very smart researchers attempted to translate Instagram's terms and conditions into plain language that younger teens could understand. At the time of their study, Instagram's terms and conditions were more than 17 pages long, more than 5,000 words in length, and had postgraduate sentence structure, meaning that even people with PhDs would have struggled to understand. The researchers distilled Instagram's terms and conditions down to a single page, 24 plain language bullet points. Here's a sample of what they did. On the left, you can see the original text. The first sentence is misleading. Instagram does not claim ownership of any content you post on or through the service. And the second sentence is a straight-up dumpster fire. 60 words long, 8 commas, 10 multi-syllable words. On the right, you can see the plain language translation. Officially, you own any original pictures and videos you post. But we're allowed to use them, and we can let others use them as well, anywhere around the world. Other people might pay us to use them, and we will not pay you for that. Here's what the teenagers in the study said after reading the plain language version. They, Instagram, must know that no one reads the terms and conditions, but if they made it more easy, then people would actually read it and think twice about the app. They write it like this so you can't understand it. When it was put that way, as opposed to being bogged down in technicalities, it made me realize just how much of my personal data I'm giving to a random company without realizing. They're also free to give this information to third parties, and all of this is something I've agreed to without realizing, just by agreeing to the terms and conditions. And my personal favorite, I'm deleting Instagram because it's weird. There's no doubt that this stuff, the dark pattern user interface, the confusing language, is bad news. These agreements are designed by the folks who make money off of your data. They write them like this to keep you confused, so you give them all of your data, even data you wanted to keep private, because more data means more money. And this is adding to our national crisis in trust. We're constantly being gamed, and this isn't good for anybody. And it's especially not good for scientists like me who are hoping you will share your fitness tracker and other health data with us so we can solve problems like my neighbor Russ's diabetes. There's another thing that's happening right now. Really big corporations are showing interest in all different types of health data, and they're buying it up as fast as they can. For example, in November, Google bought Fitbit for $2.1 billion. Remember what I was telling you about step counts? Google was after Fitbit's data. And then, in a superflex move, just a week later, Google announced it had partnered with Ascension Health, giving Google access to the health records of more than 50 million Americans in 21 states. People were stunned. They thought their health data was private. Given all of these shenanigans, the dark pattern user interface, the incomprehensible digital agreements, the uncomfortable buying and selling and partnering for access to health data that you thought was private, we scientists realized we needed to up our game. Scientists have been and continue to be one of the most trusted professions in the U.S. We want to be worthy of that trust. We need your data, but we don't want to trick you out of it. So this is the problem that my colleagues and I decided to tackle. Knowing that people want to help scientists with important health questions, but that the data that we need to do this research is not anonymous, how do we make it so that people understand what risks they're being asked to take when they're signing up to help others? One of my dad's favorite sayings from the Army is KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. So as a first step, we decided to make an intuitive user interface and use words that everyone understands and see how that worked. What's an intuitive user interface? An intuitive user interface is the opposite of a dark pattern. It helps make it easy to find information. Here's a sample from one of our first designs for an online research study. You can see there aren't a lot of words. We used a headline, subheadline format, which probably reminds you of a newspaper. It's designed to draw your attention to important information, make it easy to find. Also, we added these simple animations. We tend to skim when we read on our phones. When images relate to text, our reading speed slows down as our brain tries to figure out how the two go together. This is great because when our reading speed slows down, we're more likely to pick up on information that's important to us. We then turned our attention to the words we were using. What does it mean to use words that everyone understands? You see, we scientists tend to use a lot of jargon. So we left the comfort of our lab and went out and started talking with real people. Here's an example of what we found. Most people don't really know what the word genomics means. Some people kind of know what genetic testing means, but everybody knows DNA. Even people who cannot read at all could totally tell us what DNA meant. They said things like, it gets passed down from parents to kids. It's how you can tell if you're related to somebody. And thanks to CSI, DNA can be used to identify you at a crime scene. We used what we learned about understandable words to translate science-ese into plain language for the All of Us research program. In case you haven't heard about it yet, All of Us is the largest health study ever undertaken in the U.S. The National Institutes of Health runs it, and Republicans and Democrats came together to fund it because, remember, everybody wants to help scientists find a cure. All of Us will last for at least 10 years, and more than 1 million people will take part. The people who take part will share oodles of data, their health records, their DNA, even data from their fitness trackers to help scientists solve our most important health problems. Here's what the informed consent looks like. We used plain language. Information is distilled. You can see that the user interface is carefully structured. There are animated videos with voiceover to further help people understand. We're about 2 years in, and about 350,000 people have joined. What we found is that more than 90% of people, regardless of their educational background, can answer key questions about the study correctly after reviewing the informed consent. We did it. So what does this mean for you? Well, now you know or have been reminded about agreements that you should be wary of. If your new fitness tracker or phone or any other device, if its website is filled with long and confusing agreements or has dark pattern user interface, beware. They're probably trying to trick you into giving them as much data as you can and permission to use it any way they'd like. Second, we've talked about how we can make it better. Scientists like me are working tirelessly to improve agreements to make them super clear and easy to understand. At Sage Bionetworks, the nonprofit where I work, we're hoping that our efforts won't just change science. We're hoping that we can help the digital world to be more like my neighborhood, one filled with caring, trust, and privacy.